Giordano Bruno was one of those few representatives of humanity to whom the mysteries of the universe were revealed. Did Giordano Bruno truly uncover secret knowledge hidden from the eyes of ordinary people? They would be anticipating his time by several centuries. Or did he derive all his ideas about the structure of solar system, galaxies and the universe from masters whose works had been forgotten and rejected by the world for millennia? Today I would like to discuss with you those very secret insights in the cosmos that a young monk somehow managed to grasp. What exactly was Giordano Bruno's concept? Why did all European church authorities rejected him as soon as they learned about his views? What was he truly condemned for? And what does the story of ascension of Jesus Christ have to do with it? Giordano Bruno was born in 5048 in a town called Nola, near Naples. In his childhood he was known as Filippo, and he received the name Giordano upon becoming a monk in the church of Saint Dominic, where he studied from the age of 15. Apparently, Giordano was a monk like everyone else for a while. At the church he, like everyone else, was taught the dogmas of religion, apologetics and preaching. But most likely, at some point he drawn to the forbidden fruit. Since we are talking about the forbidden, it's worth noting that Giordano Bruno was never married and had no children. Most likely, he upheld church asceticism and the vow of celibacy throughout his life, even after firmly deciding that Christian teachings did not align with his views. He chose not to start a family, and instead he dedicated himself entirely to his ideas. Speaking of forbidden fruit, I mean forbidden knowledge. Earlier I expressed desire to share with you some thoughts on where Giordano Bruno could have drawn such precise knowledge about the structure of the universe, which was completely unconventional at that time. So, our young monk, at some point, begins, most likely Isaac Newton, to study sacred texts of ancient religions. Historians mostly talk about Giordano as a follower of Copernicus, but in addition to Copernicus' works, he was also interested in esoteric ancient writings. For example, his ideas show a clear resemblance to the Hermetic teachings of ancient Egyptians and Greeks. Giordano Bruno's concept of the universe, much like the all in Hermetic teaching, is seen as something infinite, vast, and incomprehensible. Hermetic school was typically a small and widely dispersed group across the world, transmitting knowledge about the structure of the universe and its laws through oral tradition for thousands of years. Followers of this doctrine believed that the truths of the Kybalion were described by Thoth himself, the ancient Egyptian god known as Hermes to the ancient Greeks. Here I would ask you not to confuse the Kybalion with Kabbalah, because according to some research, Giordano Bruno was also well acquainted with Kabbalistic teachings. This religious movement represented a separate branch of Judaism. Those adherents sincerely believed that within the texts of sacred Torah were concealed divine truths and knowledge about the laws of the universe. Apparently it was thanks to his curiosity and unconventional thinking that Giordano Bruno was able to grasp the truths described in ancient texts. We can argue endlessly about whether ancient people possessed some secret knowledge, or if it was all the invention of mystics, Sufis, and esoterics, and so on. But we can't deny the existence of Great Pyramid of Giza. We can't explain or refute the precision with which representatives of ancient civilizations erected their monumental structures. Moreover, all the most significant discoveries of humanity related to the structure of the universe, the movement of stars and planets, were made in antiquity, or even earlier. Could Giordano Bruno's idea of the infinity of universe not be his own idea at all, but rather that of someone who lived long before him? To answer this question, let me give you a very bright example of how scientists of different times repeated the discoveries of previous scholars. It is commonly believed that the first person to measure the circumference of the earth was Aristophanes of Caria. Aristophanes was a Greek scholar who lived in Alexandria from 276 to 186 BCE. He was in charge of the library, which housed over 100,000 books. One day, travelers from Siena arrived in Alexandria. They told of an unusual phenomenon they observed while in Siena. At the first day of summer at noon, which is also the longest day of the year, witnesses in the city of Siena observed that all objects had no shadows. This means that buildings, columns, and structures with bases extended into the ground stopped casting shadows at noon of the first day of summer. Aristophanes was greatly surprised by this news and decided to travel to Siena himself to confirm it. Meanwhile, a trusted person of Aristophanes, who was in Alexandria, was tasked with observing shadows cast by columns at the same time. Unlike in Siena, shadows did not disappear in Alexandria at noon. Upon Aristophanes' return to Alexandria, he was informed of this phenomenon. Based on this information, Aristophanes was able to calculate the circumference of the earth. He knew that the surface of Earth is curved, and that sunlight reaches both Alexandria and Siena simultaneously. If the Earth were flat, shadows would disappear at the same time in both cities. Aristophanes hypothesized that since the surface of Earth is curved, the walls and columns in Alexandria would be tilted a certain angle compared to those in Siena. Therefore, on the longest day of the year, Aristophanes measured the shadows of one of the columns in Alexandria. Knowing the height of the column, he easily drew a straight line from the top of the column to the end of the shadow, creating an imaginary triangle. Then Aristophanes measured the angle of the deviation of the column from the direction of the sunlight, which he found to be 7 degrees. Then he calculated that Alexandria was positioned 7 degrees away from Siena, along Earth's circumference. By that time it was well understood that any circle consists of 316 degrees, and Earth's circumference was no exception. 7 degrees is 1/15 of 316 degrees. Aristophanes simply multiplied the distance from Alexandria to Siena by 50. According to his calculation, the circumference of the Earth was 25,000 miles. Modern scientists have calculated the circumference of the Earth more precisely, which is 24,894 miles. He was close. What is striking here is not only the precision with which Aristophanes calculated the circumference of the Earth, but also that he was far from the first to do so. Those who constructed the pyramids of Giza knew not only the circumference of the Earth, but also the distance from Earth to the Sun. If you multiply the original height of the Great Pyramid of Khufu by 1,000,000, you get the distance from the Earth to the Sun. When calculating the ratio of the original height of Great Pyramid to its base, you encounter the numbers P and Phi. According to official history, the number P was derived by the Greek mathematician Archimedes, who lived in the 3rd century BCE. The number Phi was discovered by Fibonacci. who lived in the 12th century CE. But all these magnitudes, as we can see, were known and applied long before them, since the pyramids were built at least 4,500 years ago. However, all the time all this knowledge faded into oblivion. The works of ancient scholars and philosophers in the time of Giordano Bruno, viewed by the Catholic Church as the delusions of ignorant savages of antiquity. Giordano Bruno, being familiar with the works of ancient philosophers and scholars, and comparing them with views of his contemporaries, understood where the truth lay and where there was a falsehood. At the age of 24, Bruno began his service in the church. His ideas differed so much from Catholic doctrine that the clergy immediately saw a heretic in the young monk. Giordano was forced to flee Italy. After that, he traveled extensively throughout Europe. For a time he lived in England and lectured there. His ideas were not accepted by the public and even intellectuals, and he faced persecution everywhere. He moved from England to Germany and then to France, where he taught mnemonic techniques to King Henry III himself. The King of France personally invited Giordano Bruno to give him several lessons in mnemonics, which is the art of remembering. I think it's safe to say that not every monk in those times could have the honor to give lessons to the King of France. I think it's reasonable to assume that Giordano Bruno's knowledge and abilities were so valuable that he, being an ordinary monk with a rather controversial reputation, was able to impress even kings. But despite all his charm and broad knowledge, it seems he couldn't grasp that it would have been prudent to keep some of his ideas secret from general public. Because as soon as Giordano Bruno shared his views on the world and God with a new audience, they immediately dismissed him as if he were a leper. Giordano Bruno's theory, which formed in his mind, directly contradicted with the Christian beliefs at that time. Catholics then believed that the earth was the center of the universe, and the sun, moon, and planets of the solar system revolted around the earthly kingdom. All stars observed in the sky were perceived as immovable objects, merely decorations. According to the contemporaries of Giordano Bruno, beyond the solar system began the kingdom of God. Giordano Bruno's idea of an infinite universe where God is not a separate entity but uniformly distributed throughout space contradicted the Christian belief in the seven heavens and God seated on the throne, observing everything happening on earth from there. But I think this dissent would have been forgiven to Giordano Bruno if his views on the structure of the universe had not undermined the very foundation of Christianity. Here we approach a rather delicate topic. For some, what I will say next may not be very pleasant to hear. And to avoid offending anyone's feelings, let's say that everything said hereafter is merely a product of my imagination. So, the ascension of Jesus Christ. Today, thanks to the discoveries of scientists, we understand that Giordano Bruno was correct in his beliefs, and his ideas about the structure of the universe correspond to what we observe through modern telescopes. We don't see any seven heavens, and there is no object in space that in any way resembles God's throne. As known from the Bible, the God of Israel resurrected Jesus Christ in body and flesh. That is, Jesus Christ, after suffering a long time on the cross, gave up his spirit, after which God resurrected him in body and flesh, meaning he restored his physical shell. Then Jesus ascended into heaven in his physical body. What do you think is the inconsistency here? Let me ask the question a bit differently. What do you think is more humane? Crucifying someone on the cross or throwing him into open space? But there is an even more inhumane way. First torturing someone to death, then resurrecting him, and only then hurling him into open space. It's obvious what happened to the body of the Jesus Christ as he ascended and went beyond the atmosphere. Most likely due to the pressure changes, he lost consciousness while ascending. At least I hope so. I wouldn't wish such torment to anyone. For example, when climbers ascend Mount Everest, they take breaks at certain intervals to acclimatize their body to the altitude, and only then continue their journey. In passenger airplanes, there is a system that stabilizes cabin pressure relative to external pressure. Otherwise, all passengers and crew face an undesirable fate. The same goes for sailors serving aboard submarines. The human body cannot tolerate sudden pressure changes. Some may say, but Jesus was God. Reading the Bible, we see how Jesus suffered. When he was tortured by soldiers and nailed to the cross, he felt pain like any other person. Moreover, God resurrected him in his physical body, and the Bible emphasizes this. Apparently, the biblical God didn't know that beyond the earth begins a space where no living organism can survive. It would have been foolish for God to resurrect someone in flesh and blood, knowing that this physical form would soon be destroyed again. I think Giordano Bruno understood that something was amiss with Christianity's main miracle, and openly expressed doubts about the truthfulness of the story of Jesus Christ's ascension. You see, although the Inquisition is often portrayed as an incredibly cruel, punitive body, they were simply guardians of Catholic beliefs and dogma. Giordano Bruno's ideas not only contradicted Christian beliefs, but also called into question Christianity's most important miracle, the ascension of the Jesus Christ. Furthermore, Giordano Bruno also didn't believe in the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary's Divine Son. Throughout history, there have always been people who stood out of their contemporaries in their ideas and views on life. However, in most cases they didn't attract much attention from the ruling elite, provided that these eccentrics did not oppose established norms and beliefs and did not constitute opposition to authority. Take, for example, Diogenes of Sinope. He was a lunatic, but his ideas posed absolutely no threat to the ruling elite. The situation was completely different with Socrates. He tried to educate the youth and instill his views on the world, for which he was sentenced to death. Giordano Bruno, like Socrates, did not renounce his ideas. He spent over 6 years in prison. Throughout this time, the Inquisition seemingly tried every method to extract his dissent. The fact that Inquisition did not immediately execute the scientist refuels the idea that they were mere executioners. Nevertheless, Giordano Bruno did not relent under any pressure. Apparently, he believed in truthfulness of his ideas no less than Socrates did. Otherwise, he wouldn't have willingly sacrificed his own life. What's remarkable is that Giordano Bruno and Socrates had the opportunity to survive, but neither of them took advantage of this opportunity, as it would have undermined everything they fought for throughout their lives. The history of humanity shows us numerous examples of people who, under the influence of some supreme idea, committed great deeds and great crimes. These individuals were so convinced of their righteousness that they were willing to sacrifice even their own lives to these ideas. I'm wondering, what do you think about this? Write your opinion in the comments. See you soon.